Hi, I'm Caron Steele and I'm here to take you through my photographic journey from being a complete novice back in 2014 when I didn't own a DSLR, I had no idea what the difference was between a RAW file and a JPEG, to 2019 when I won 2 International Photographic Awards, which I am absolutely delighted about. What I'd like to do is to take you through my journey and so that you can learn from some of the mistakes I've made, because there really is no point in reinventing the wheel if you can learn from others. However, for me, my wildlife photography is about so much more than just winning awards. I think it's a great form of mindfulness, and in these tricky times, I think that's something to be very conscious of. Just getting closer to nature, the beauty, the cruelty, but the endurance in that circle of life I find very inspiring, and the focus that photography requires and the calmness and preparation and practice is a great release. It takes you away from the stresses and strains of everyday life and gives you another viewpoint on the world. So I cannot recommend it highly enough for a good bit of stress relief. One of my favourite sayings, and a little bit cheesy I admit, is that life is not about the number of breaths you take, but the number of moments that take your breath away. And for me, that's what wildlife photography has given me again and again and again, so many moments that just take your breath away. And I really hope that that's what you can find from photography. And the great thing about wildlife photography is that it doesn't matter who you are. You can be fat or thin, tall or short, young or old. You know, it's accessible to everybody. There's a genre for everybody. For me, I love the wildlife photography and could not be without it now. But there will be something that suits you and that you can be passionate about. And if you're passionate about something, you will do well at it. And you don't need to travel far to get a great photo. This photo I'm going to show you next was one of the first ones I ever entered into a competition, and it was taken less than half a mile from my front door. Admittedly, I am lucky and I do live in a farm in the middle of the countryside, but it's not always so lucky when it's pouring with rain and miserable. This particular photo was commended for the 2016 Outdoor Photographer of the Year in the Wildlife Insight category and published in its book, and I thought, wow, I have a photo published, that's awesome. And that inspired me to go on and try and do a little bit more. And as I said, you don't need to travel far. These next 2 photos were just taken of a nest I spotted on the windowsill of my bedroom, where I spent a week or 2 cramped up in a very small corner trying to peer through the curtains in a tiny chink so as not to disturb the birds. But there are opportunities everywhere. It's just looking for them and finding them. And that's another key thing. Do your research. Find out where your best opportunities are of getting good sightings, because you will feel so much more inspired if you have the opportunities to take photographs rather than just taking pot luck and sitting in a field and hoping for the best. There is a wealth of information out there. I regularly consult the oracle of Google and YouTube, because I have learned most of my photography from YouTube tutorials and online workshops and bits and pieces like that. And I think it's important to look at other people's photos whenever I go out to take a photograph, if I have something in mind, like this next picture, which I entered into the British Wildlife Photography Awards, which was taken at Bempton Cliffs. I knew I was going to photograph diving gannets. I'd done my research, I'd gone onto Google, I'd looked at hundreds and hundreds of amazing images of gannets, but a lot of them were very similar, and a lot of them required underwater camera equipment that I did not have and didn't have the funds to purchase at the time. So I was trying to think of a different angle, a different perspective. Fortunately, when I got there, we had glorious sunshine and lots of scudding clouds. It did make the exposure compensation a little bit of a nightmare, but it left these amazing patterns on the water and a beautiful abstract picture. What I really wanted to do was to capture the character and the nature of these amazing birds who seem to move with as much ease underwater as they do through the sky. Learning about the character and behaviour of the creatures that you're trying to photograph is really key in order to capture a good picture. Because if you cannot predict, or at least have a chance of predicting what it's going to do next, it's very hard to get that all-important, moment of amazing animal behaviour. And that's what makes a photograph or an image really special. If it tells a story, if it tells you something about the character of that animal or bird, and it brings the whole thing to life. For me, I watched the diving gannets for about an hour and decided that the image I wanted to get was one of the bird, as it were, flying through the sea, because they move with such ease through the water just as easily as they move through the skies. I waited for the moment as the bird just was breaking the surface of the water, so there was a very thin meniscus of water over him. So he still was obviously underwater, but not so much so that it wasn't sharp, and I just wanted to try and get the element of him flying through the water, and also those amazing colours that the scudding clouds were creating over the sea. Fortunately for me, the image I captured was unique enough to win the 2017 Coast and Marine category in the British Wildlife Photography Awards. Amazingly, I was on a roll that week, for I also won the Nature's Best Photography Africa Mammals of Africa Portrait Award with this image of a little baby giraffe. I think this photo demonstrates the importance of clean backgrounds. I had taken several photos whilst we'd watched these little giraffes playing on a track. They were mimicking drinking behaviour, and they were very newly born. You could still see signs of her umbilical cord. And they were bending down and with their legs splayed, all fours, looking as if they were trying to drink, and then losing their balance and jumping in the air. And so many of the images that I took initially had other giraffes in the background, or legs, or an unfortunate bit of a tree. And I did stop and review my images, and I think that's very important in the heat of the moment, to remember to stop and review a couple, make sure you're not burning out your highlights, check your histogram, and check your backgrounds. Because so often when I started off, and I still make the mistake now, is I just get so excited and a huge adrenaline rush as soon as I see some great animal behaviour that I'm in there clicking away, and sometimes I completely forget that I've got to make sure that there isn't a twig sticking out the head of the animal when I review the picture, or a huge pile of elephant dung in the foreground. So do try and pause and recompose and get that ideal background. So stop, breathe, and try and check your background is clear. And then when you do capture that lovely little moment of animal behaviour, it will sing to the audience because there will be no distractions. So hopefully this rather dodgy diagram will explain what I mean by trying to make sure you have clean backgrounds, and to give you a better chance of getting that clean background. Because it's not only about checking what is actually physically there, but also about the angle that you take the photograph from. Generally, I like to try and take photos at eye level to be on the same perspective as the animal or the bird that I'm photographing, trying to capture that catch light in their eyes. But also, as you see from this, if you're shooting down on something, you hit the floor or the background at the same time as you hit the animal that you're photographing. So both are in focus and the background is equally sharp. Whereas if you are at eye level, like in the lower photograph, you'll see your background, you're shooting through the creature, and your background is further away, which gives you a softer, defocused, fuzzy background and a sharp creature in the foreground. So your attention is immediately drawn to that. And that makes your photograph that much more impactful. Sometimes what you want to do is to convey a story with the background and give a sense of place. This is what I was trying to do with this photograph of a great crested grebe that I shot on a canal in Wales. It was a very messy background, but the category was for urban wildlife in your backyard or local. And I was trying to point to the fact that it was in an urban rural area without actually having to show the ugly, messy background that was there. So I picked on an image with the reflections of the red brick buildings, the white windows, etc. in the water that sort of indicated that we were in an urban setting, but still gave a nice, clean and attractive photograph. Travelling a little further afield, in 2018, I was lucky enough to visit the Arctic, which is so breathtakingly beautiful, as blue as you could imagine. And there is no doubt in my mind the devastating effect that global warming is having on this amazing part of the planet. However, I've just included this because I was lucky enough to get shortlisted for the portfolio category in the 2018 National Geographic Photographic Awards or Photography Awards, and I have my images published in the book. There was a little collection of some nice interaction and animal behaviour, some very sad and unusual behaviour with the male polar bear contemplating attacking these walruses because he was so hungry and desperate for food, but realised that the larger ones that stayed on land were far too big for him. Moving on to 2019, I was then absolutely thrilled to have 2 images highly commended in Nature's Best Photography William Smith Rice Awards. This was in the African wildlife category, and it's a huge competition. It's one of the big American competitions, and I was, again, absolutely thrilled. And probably more so because I remember taking these photos, and I'd asked our driver to pull up because the impala are in a group and starting to joust, and they are so beautiful. They mirror image each other whilst they're jousting, and I wanted to try and capture that. But there are lots and lots of impala around in Kenya and Africa, and because they're quite common, pretty well everybody else just drives past. About 10 vehicles went past us whilst I was trying to capture these photos. But the important thing was trying to capture them with a clean background, and they are jumping around a lot, so it's not desperately easy. But I wanted to try and get a photo, and finally achieved it with a fairly clean background and some lovely mirror imaging. And thankfully, they got me some awards. Now moving on to Amateur Photographer of the Year 2019. This was a competition I really enjoyed because it challenged me on so many levels, and it was tricky. It was really hard for me because you had to perform in lots of different categories. It was such a good competition because it made me get out of my comfort zone and try lots of different things that I'd never tried before. And even though I discovered that some of those genres aren't really for me, they don't excite me the way wildlife photography does, I've learned different techniques and tricks by trying different genres of photography. So I think one of the key things about improving your photography is to experiment and not be afraid of making mistakes. Keep practicing. Practice makes perfect. Quickly running through some of the categories, this one was called After Dark. Knowing I was going out to Mongolia, I planned to capture a night sky image on my travels, as I knew there would be little or no light pollution and a good chance of capturing the Milky Way on a clear night. I spent quite a long time out in the desert learning different techniques to photograph night skies, pestering our poor photography guide for more tips and tricks all the time. I came upon the idea of using this obliging camel herder as a focus point for this particular shot. It is a blend of many photos. I used a combination of flash, light painting,
and about 9 long exposure photographs of the night sky blended together using a software called Starry Landscape Stacker, which helps eliminate the noise. I enjoy the challenge, and each time I learn a new technique, it gives me a little more confidence going forward with my photography. I think it's so good to practice different techniques, because each time you learn a little bit more about your camera and how it works, and what you're comfortable with, enabling you to get better shots all around in the future. As well as getting an expert first and 8th in this round, I also received a crowd judged 5th and 7th, and I particularly liked my crowd 5th image of the Aurora I took in Iceland, reflected in the waters around the Vestrahorn. Possibly because I truly paid for that photo. I had not realised as I knelt down in the shallow waters to set up my tripod for the photo that the front of my waders had flopped down, and as I stood up, it scooped a whole load of icy seawater into my boots at about 1 a.m. in the morning. I was out there for at least another 90 minutes taking photos to get this shot, with freezing, soggy feet. So I suffered for my art. To add insult to injury, I then discovered when I got back to the hotel that I'd lost my room key card and the night porter had gone AWOL, so I had to sleep on a sofa in the corridor in my wet kit. So not a great experience all round, but I did love the photo.
So this category is Mad About Mono, and black and white photography is always something I've been pretty terrified of, to be quite honest with you. It takes a certain creative eye to be able to spot something that would work very well in black and white. And I am trying to educate myself. Each time I take a photo that I like, I toggle between the black and white and colour on Adobe Lightroom, and it just gives me a rough idea of which images could possibly work in black and white. It doesn't give you the finished article, but it's a good indicator. Remarkably, I managed to get an expert 3rd and 4th in this category. And one of the things I like so much about this competition is the feedback that you get and the constructive criticism which helps you to learn and to improve your photographs. So for example, with this elephant photo, I got some constructive criticism and feedback. The judges said that the portrait format was the correct choice for the composition and that the detail captured in the dust was perfect, but that they would like to have seen a little bit more contrast. And looking at the image, I totally agree. This next category was all about macro photography, something that I had never tried before and knew nothing about. So I watched a lot of YouTube tutorials and thoroughly enjoyed the experience and was lucky enough to get an expert commended and a crowd 8th. So just keeping me in the leaderboard. And looking at these photos, again, if I just quickly flash up the winning images, they all have clean backgrounds. They all draw you straight to the subject matter. So just remember, clean backgrounds every time, and that will give you a strong winning photo. With the whatever the weather category, I managed a 3rd and a 5th with my pictures of the hooper swans flying out through the steam, emerging from a Japanese onsen, and also these 2 beautiful crowned cranes performing their courtship ritual in the snow. Again, you suffer for your art. This was minus 21 degrees when I took these photos, so I cannot stress also enough how important it is to have the right kit and the right clothing and to be comfortable when you're doing your photography. Because if you're cold and wet and miserable, you will not be able to focus on your subject matter and you will not be able to get that great photo. So important, really important, is good clothing that will protect you in whatever elements you're in. Having the right camera stance is crucial to getting good sharp photos. So here, bringing out the big guns. If your lens is wobbling around like this, you're never going to get a good sharp shot. So I tend to hold my camera in close to my body with my elbows tucked in tight and resting against me. Make sure you're looking horizontally through the viewfinder, not down at an angle, because otherwise you'll find that the image you see is not the one that the camera is taking. So brace yourself, bring the camera in, bring your arms in, so that you're steady. Keep your feet about shoulder distance apart with a slight bend in the leg. I tend to lean slightly forward when I do this, just personal preference. And then I tend to hold my breath whilst I'm taking that shot so that I've got ultimate stability. Also giving yourself a position where you can rotate from the hip if you're panning or following a bird is great. And remember, when you're there, you don't have to keep your feet still, you can move them around, so don't just nail yourself rigidly to a spot. If you want that, then use a really good tripod, and there are occasions where a tripod is invaluable, so it's important to make sure that you have a sturdy one and that will work well with your camera and chosen lenses so that you've got the correct weight taken into account of all your kit when you're choosing a tripod. And this final category I'm showing you is the animal magic category.
I won both expert and crowd first place in this category with my picture of a Dalmation Pelican running across the frozen surface of Lake Caron in Greece. Again, you can see from all the shots in this category that they have one thing in common, and that's clear backgrounds. Not messy or distracting, just allowing you to focus straight to the key element of the photograph. This is my expert judged third place image of 3 wild horses of Camargue running through the sea. Often referred to as the angels of Camargue, I reduced the clarity slightly on this image to give it a slightly more ethereal effect. And this is my first place image of this beautiful, comical Dalmatian pelican, resplendent in its breeding plumage, running to take off from the frozen waters of the lake. This photo also won me the 2019 Bird Photographer of the Year Awards, my crowning glory for 2019. The photo made me smile the moment I saw it, and it went straight on my wall at home, long before I won any of the competitions, and I was stunned and delighted that it won the Best Portrait category, the People's Choice category, and ultimately the 2019 Bird Photographer of the Year Award, competing against amateurs and professionals from around the world. 2019 was truly an amazing year for me. So to recap, I think the important thing to remember is to ask questions. Never be afraid to ask and learn from others, as I have done. There are so many YouTube tutorials and images to look at on Google for ideas and inspiration. Do your research and find out about the best places to go for sightings. For example, if you're looking to photograph Dalmatian pelicans, Lake Caron in January or February, when the birds are in their breeding plumage, is a great place to visit. Not only will you find plentiful birds, but great backdrops giving you wonderful distant, soft out of focus backgrounds, drawing attention through to your subject matter. And look for a story that holds your image together, like this photo of 3 whooper swans and the passage through time progressing from the young cygnet at the front through to the older bird and the backdrop of the ancient mountains.
Remember to try and pre-visualise your shot. Here I remember actually climbing through a bush to get into a position to get a clean background whilst these hummingbirds were hovering around the fuchsia plants in the garden of a lodge I was staying at in Costa Rica. But also remember that a background can tell a story, like this image that I had shortlisted for the Wildlife Photographer of the Year Awards this year. And work with the light.
Experiment with your photography. Try backlit photos and silhouettes to make your subject stand out. But most of all, have fun and never give up.